DND number 6, The Worth of Souls in Jesus' Name, Chapter 14. What's happening? Mickey whispered. Listen to me carefully. Get your phone, go in the bathroom, and lock the door. Call Jason, tell him we've got company. But, oh, no, no, no. Her nails dug into Jeff's forearm in panic as she realized what was happening. Someone's in the house? They've come for me, haven't they? Mick, come on now, don't freeze up on me. You have to trust me. Please just do as I say. Lock the door and don't come out until I come to get you. He handed her the phone off the night table. Here, go. And Mick, I love you. He scrambled off the bed. Please be careful, Jeff. But he'd already left the room. Moving silently on bare feet, Jeff eased down the steps. He saw a ray of light, obviously from a flashlight, skim down the wall near the front entrance. Another one hit the front door simultaneously, so he knew there was more than one intruder. As Jeff neared the halfway mark of the staircase, a third man stepped into view, looking up the steps as if he'd been waiting for him. The surprise in his eyes told Jeff the man had been assigned to watch the stairs and had failed in his duty. The intruder raised his weapon, but Jeff fired first, hitting him square in the chest. Jeff dove left, over the railing, then scrambled toward the living room as several shots peppered the stair and wall where he'd been standing. He rose immediately and took out the black shadow that had been coming from the dining area, but not before he felt the sting in his shoulder. That's 2 down, he mentally calculated. Another gunman squeezed off several shots. The sliding glass patio doors behind him shattered as Jeff barely dodged the bullets and threw himself behind the sofa. The house became deadly silent. Jeff couldn't be sure that there was only the one left. Crawling on his belly, he made his way into the dining area. Satisfied there was nowhere for an intruder to hide in there, he rose and stealthily made his way into the kitchen, which was only a narrow corridor-like room with doorways that led from the front entrance area near the stairway to the dining room on the other side. Jeff? He looked up in horror as Mickey stepped from the stair landing and moved toward him where he stood in the kitchen. Dear Jesus, he began. He heard the steps before he saw the man charge her. Mickey gasped as the guy grabbed her from behind, his forearm locked around her neck. It was the gun pressed to her temple that had Jeff's heart stuttering. Drop the gun. I'll kill her. You know I will, the man said. Jeff pressed his lips together and shook his head. Why haven't you? Isn't that what you came here to do? Drop the gun, the man yelled. I drop the gun, you'll kill us both. No, I just want to get out, that's all. Drop it. I'm not playing around. He jerked his arm, making Mickey gasp for air. Okay. I'll drop, Jeff said. Now. But Jeff's eyes narrowed as the gunman did something strange. He raised his arm and glanced at his watch. Now, I said. Okay. I'm dropping it right. He squeezed the trigger. Mickey screamed. The gunman fell back against the wall, a small black hole gaping between his eyes. Jeff moved forward, grabbed Mickey. Come on, hurry. What's? No time, he yelled as he pushed her ahead of him through the broken shards of the sliding glass doors. The room exploded. Mickey knew a strange sensation as she and Jeff both went airborne and landed in the backyard. Afterward, like the dawn after a storm, there was silence. Mickey didn't know how long she'd been lying there. She realized there'd been a bomb. She realized her house was on fire. She knew help was close because the sirens were loud enough to be nearby. She realized Jeff's heavy body lay on top of her, protecting her as always. Slowly, she finally realized he wasn't moving. She pushed up against his chest, but he didn't respond. Jeff? She cried. Jeff? Terror gave her the strength to crawl out from under him and turn him over. Jeff! She screamed. Jeff! She bent over him. He wasn't breathing. Blood oozed from his nose. She started mouth to mouth. She blew life into him until she was so dizzy that she couldn't tell up from down. Hands tugged at her, pulling her away. No! Let me go! Jeff! Let the paramedics work on him, a familiar voice said. Come on, you can't help him that way. Mickey slowly looked up into Jack's face. Is he? Jack, is Jeff? I don't know. He flung herself against his chest. No, 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 she sobbed. Jack held her tight while he watched the paramedics work on Jeff. Jack himself was mesmerized by the limpness of Jeff's arms as they moved him around. That wasn't Jeff. The lifeless guy lying there couldn't be Jeff. He heard them call out the numbers for his blood pressure. 40-something over 20-something was not good. Then things got worse. Mickey looked up when she heard the medic team call, "Clear." She watched them put paddles to Jeff's chest and shock him, which meant they were trying to either regulate his heartbeat or restart his heart. She collapsed to the ground in a daze. Not real, she thought. Can't be real. This is another dream, right? Jeff is strong. Jeff is practically immortal. He can't die. Not Jeff. Not her Jeff. She closed her eyes and willed him back to life. You said you'd never leave me, she thought. You said you weren't going anywhere. Don't leave me, Jeff. Please don't leave me. Jack knelt down beside her. Mickey? She looked up at him, not really seeing him. Mickey, he's alive, Jack said. She became alert. He is? Yeah. His heart's beating. He's breathing. Now we have to see to you. To me? A paramedic put a blanket around her shoulders. Let me check you out, a woman said softly. Mickey nodded, keeping her eyes on Jeff until they placed him on a stretcher and took him around front of what was left of her house. Jason appeared. He stopped the gurney, spoke briefly to the paramedic before they went on. He didn't seem to be his usual reserved self. He walked toward her, worry etched on his face. Is he okay? She asked. He's alive. He has a concussion. His heart tried to stop, but they were able to remedy that. He was grazed twice by bullets, but those are just flesh wounds. Looks like he's going to be okay. Tears coursed down Mickey's cheeks. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she whispered. New scene. Mickey sat in a chair in a waiting room, her knees drawn up, her arms wrapped tightly around them. She watched Jason walk back from the vending area, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one. She lowered her legs and accepted the styrofoam cup with a nod. How much longer do you think it will be before we can see him? It's already been well over an hour. I don't think it'll be too much longer. She nodded. Agent Dodge and Stevens had left not 15 minutes ago. She told them all she knew. They said they'd be back to speak with Jeff. She looked out the window, noting the pink tinges of dawn creeping over the horizon. He did this, she said vehemently. He's going down, Jason said. Everyone keeps saying that, but he's alive and well, isn't he? He's asleep in his comfortable custom bed with silk sheets. Soon he'll rise with a smile on his face and be anxious to hear the top news story of the day. And he'll sit down to his stupid ritual breakfast and force my mother to sit with him for exactly 1 hour. She smiled. Oh, but he'll be furious to know that he missed again, that I survived. She gave a soft chuckle. I'd love to see the look on his face when he hears I'm alive. Well, thank God for that, Jason mumbled. He briefly closed his eyes and pointed upward. Mickey watched him. She'd seen Jeff do something like that, and the Kenos, and Mark and Joey Adams, and even Agent Jack and Nate. What you just did, Jason. Tell me about that. He glanced at her. What did I do? You pointed upward. Did I? I guess I do it so much it's become second nature to me. I was thanking God that you made it through alive, and Jeff too. He shrugged. It seems I'm almost in a constant state of prayer. I'm either thanking God or asking him for some assistance all the time. Mickey frowned, trying hard to understand. And he answers you? Jason smiled at her. He does. How? I mean, do you hear a voice in your head? Well, actually, sometimes I do. It took me a while to realize I was hearing his voice. I used to think these random thoughts I had were just my mind chatter, just my own thoughts. But I began to recognize his voice. It would usually be accompanied by a strong feeling of peace, or of clarity, or of motivation. And then, as if he knew I, in my humanness, would need confirmation, he would give me that confirmation. Well, I don't mean to be dumb, but how would you receive a confirmation? Jason nodded. That's not dumb. It's a good question. The confirmation could be something like a synchronicity or what some people call a coincidence. But there are really no such things as coincidences. For example, back when I was trying to decide if I should invest everything I had to start Ameritech, I had 5 different people who had no idea what I was thinking about doing, in the course of a simple conversation, tell me that they wish they could hire their own FBI to help them with whatever problem they were having. And after the 5th one, it finally got through to me it was the right course of action. And then, as I sat out under the stars and was thanking God for the confirmations, a shooting star shot straight down in front of my eyes. And because I had my mind in heavenly places, I knew in my heart that was God acknowledging me. He stopped and wiped the tear from his eye. Mickey watched him, her eyes wide. Wow. Well, that was amazing. It's like I can feel what you're talking about in my own heart. Jason smiled. Remember that feeling, Mick. What is God talking? That is God talking to you. So I'm assuming you're a Christian? I am. And Jesus is my constant companion. And is everyone in your company a Christian? No, but I can't even tell you how many people who work for me have become Christians. It's in the hundreds, maybe thousands. Really? Do you have some kind of missionary initiative? No. We teach by example. What do you mean? Well, for example, this whole conversation just happened because you saw me offer a quick prayer of thanks. I set the example. It led to you asking questions. God touched your heart as I spoke. That's how it works. Mickey nodded in understanding. They sat in companionable silence for some time. Jason looked at her. You know, you're closer to God than you think. How's that? Back at your house, you asked me about Jeff's condition. When I told you he was going to be okay, you said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." I was thanking you. Were you? I had nothing to do with Jeff's condition. I just arrived. You were grateful Jeff was alive, and the only one to thank for that at that moment was God. So, just naturally, automatically, you offered a prayer of thanks. She sat thinking about that for several minutes. It was Mickey who broke the silence on what she thought was a completely different subject. You should have seen him. Jeff, that guy had a gun pointed at my head, and Jeff, he was so calm. He never even hesitated. He fired his gun and got me out of there so fast. 2 seconds slower, and we'd probably both be dead. Jason smiled kindly. Eyebrows raised, he pointed upward. Oh. I think I'm beginning to understand, she said. It was Jason who changed the subject. You love Jeff very much, don't you? I know we haven't known each other very long, but yes, I believe I do. Well, I know Jeff well, and I've seen him go through several relationships. And you're it for him. He smiled, but you didn't hear it from me. Thank you, Mickey replied, smiling sweetly. Sighing, Jason looked out the window. He had business he needed to take care of. Once he saw Jeff for himself, he'd have to get Nate over here to stay with Mickey. He'd already contacted Jeff's parents, and they would be arriving sometime today. Your stepfather will probably be taken into custody today, Jason informed her. We've built a decent case against him. Really? Mickey asked, disdain in her voice. And how fast will they let him out on bail? Well, that's purely at the judge's discretion. He'll keep getting out. He won't go to jail. I doubt he'll go to trial. He will go to trial, and he will be found guilty. Kidnapping, accessory to kidnapping, rape, child endangerment, child cruelty, attempted murder, and I'm just getting started. Rape? Murder? Mickey asked softly. Dora is going to testify. Mickey's face paled, and she set her cup down. Are you sure? Yes, we're putting her and her family into protective custody. Daly murdered her husband. She realizes she let him get away with everything for too long. It's time to step up. Mickey looked down at her feet as memories surfaced. She didn't raise her head when Jason's hand covered hers and squeezed. Next scene. Good morning, dear, Talman chirped at his wife as he entered the dining room. Something smells wonderful. Is Dora back? Marion wrung her hands. No, she's still out. Says she'll be out for a while. Talman shrugged. It doesn't matter. We'll be leaving for our extended vacation tomorrow. So, what have you cooked up in there? Marion smiled at him. This was the man she remembered, the one she'd fallen in love with. I've made a spinach quiche and buttery croissants. Sounds lovely. I'll have my coffee first if you don't mind. Not at all. I'll just be a second. She exited the dining room, humming softly to herself. Talman opened the doors of the hutch that sat atop the large buffet and turned on the television, anxious to hear the news. When Marion returned with his coffee, his expression brought her up short. Nervously, she set the cup by his right hand. Talman? Is something wrong? He spoke to her without looking at her, his tone dangerously soft. There was an explosion at Mackenzie's home last night. Marion's hands flew to her face. Oh no, are you sure? Yes. Mickey escaped unharmed. Her little boyfriend is in the hospital. I have to see her, Marion said, untying the apron at her waist. You will do no such thing. Talman, she's my daughter. I have to see her. Did they say how it happened? Did they say what caused the explosion? Talman looked up at her with derision. I never realized you were such an idiot. Marion gasped. Talman shook his head. Oh, Marion, what did I ever see in you, huh? She didn't answer, only stood with a bewildered look on her aging face as she struggled to understand the direction the conversation had taken. It sounded like he no longer wanted her. No, wait. There was something much more important to attend to, wasn't there? Oh, yes, it was Mickey. Her house was destroyed in an explosion. Then again, it was just a house, something material. And here was her husband of 21 years speaking to her as if he were about to leave her. That was much more important than a house, right? You've been much more trouble than you were ever worth. Nothing has worked out the way it should, the way I'd planned. Not one thing. I don't understand. I know you don't. Part of that is my fault. I guess I definitely encouraged your little prescription drug habit. I don't have a drug habit, Talman. I'm sick. I need my medications. You know that. Yes, dear, I know. At least I know that's what you believe. But look at yourself, Marion. All those pills. They've aged you. You look like an old, used hooker. Too much makeup, skinny and haggard, breasts like dried up prunes. Now that I'm really looking at you, I can't believe I've actually stayed with you and even allowed you in my bed. Tears welled up in her eyes. Talman, it's not like you to say such mean things to me. He gave a short laugh. Isn't it? You don't know me at all. Marion, not at all. He found himself wanting to hurt her. He wanted to break her down completely. He wanted to make her suffer. Nothing had worked out. He'd endured her idiocy all these years just to have everything fall apart right here at the end. An exchange will be made tonight that will bring him more money than God. He'd originally planned to buy his way right into the presidency. Now all those plans were gone, thanks to Mackenzie. Still, he thought, he'll have the money by morning. There is no reason why he can't go on with his secondary plans, which are to disappear and live like a king in another country. It just won't be as much fun knowing Mackenzie survived. Then again, with the money he'll have, he can hire a real professional. As a matter of fact, he could drag it out for years, terrorize her, make her suffer, make her life as miserable as she'd made his. A shame he couldn't do to her what he'd never let himself do all these years. There was nothing left of his political aspirations, thanks to her. If only he could get in one more shot at her before he left tomorrow. And then he realized he could. She was probably at the hospital watching over her boyfriend. With him out of commission and all the excitement over the explosion, she would probably be alone. He needed to get to her. However, him arriving at the hospital would not go unnoticed. No, he needed her to come to him. And she wouldn't do that, of course. She would never come at his request. But he was sure she would come for Marion. Or, his face brightened, for Marissa. Yes, that was the way to go. He'd need Marion, though, to pull it off. Talman? His eyes shifted back to his wife. Had he actually planned on bringing her with him when he left for his new life? What had he been thinking? She was nothing more than a nuisance, and he watched as she stood waiting like some homeless dog for him to speak to her, to offer her a bone. Her hands shook. She looked toward the kitchen. He knew what she was thinking. She needed a pill. She truly disgusted him. How he'd like to be rid of her. Maybe tonight when she goes to bed he'll make her a nightcap, one she won't wake up from. The idea gave him a jolt of excitement and pleasure. How good would it feel to rid himself of the pesky fly he'd endured all these years? Yes, what a wonderful idea. Why hadn't he thought of it sooner? For now, though, he needed her for a few more errands. He smiled at her. I apologize, Marion. I don't know what came over me. I was so distraught. I guess I took it out on you. Forgive me? She smiled at him. Oh, well, of course, Talman. We all have our little moods, don't we? Yes, we do. Why, with all this with Mickey, first her being kidnapped and then her saying what she said about you getting arrested and then Marissa being taken away. I don't need a recap. Oh, of course you don't, dear. Sorry. Marion, can we just sit and eat breakfast? You know how much I look forward to our morning breakfast together, just you and me. She retied her apron and sighed happily. Well, let me warm your coffee and I'll get your breakfast. Thank you, dear. And then maybe we'll talk about you giving Mackenzie a call. That would be great. I really want to go see her. Actually, I want her to come here. The judge says I'm not allowed to get close to her, but I'm so worried about her, Marion, and I'm hoping I can get you to talk her into coming here. But I want you to call her and tell her to come here. Talman, she won't come here. She's very angry at you. I know. Nonetheless, don't you think it's time to put a stop to all this foolishness? I think it can all be solved if we just all sit down together and really communicate. Like they always say, communication is the key. Well, that would be wonderful, but I'm trying to tell you it won't make any difference if I call her. She won't come. Sure she will, he said softly. She will when she learns I have Marissa here. Marion's brow wrinkled. But Marissa's not here. He closed his eyes and forced himself to stay calm. She is a freaking idiot, he told himself. Be patient. Marion, I want you to try hard to follow what I'm asking you to do. Her eyes welled with tears. I'm trying, Talman, but I don't understand. You will call Mickey and tell her I have Marissa here and she is to come if she ever loved her sister. You mean you want me to pretend that you're going to punish Marissa? He looked at her incredulously. Yeah, that's it, Marion. Tell her you don't know what I'm going to do to Marissa, that I'm so angry and you're worried about her. And Marion, tell her to come alone. Tell her I'll know if she's not alone. Oh, dear. If I tell her that, she'll be even angrier when she gets here. She'll never be willing to sit down and talk things out. Talman nodded. It's just a way to get her here. Once she gets here, I'll explain to her why I had you say those things. I'm sure she'll understand once I tell her how much I want this big misunderstanding to be over. Marion smiled. I should never have questioned you. That's correct, Marion. I'll get your breakfast. You do that. New scene. Mickey stood over Jeff's bed, his hand squeezing hers. He glanced up at her as Jason gave him a rundown of what had transpired. She smiled. He smiled back. He had a few cuts on the side of his face and a bandage around his upper left arm. Otherwise, he was whole and healthy, and swearing he was going to take the IV out himself if someone didn't do it soon. He'd been told to calm down, that they would be releasing him shortly. He'd already stripped off the hospital gown and pulled his jeans back on. His chest was bare. They'd begged him to stay, to let them monitor him for a few more hours. Mickey had only been able to have a few quick personal words with him before the world converged on him. The police department, the FBI, the media. And so I have to take care of business, Jason finished up. Nate will be here soon. He'll take care of whatever you need. Oh, and here, he said, setting Jeff's gun down. I had two on me, Jeff said. Yep. Feds confiscated the one you used so they could put together the crime scene. We literally had to pry it out of your cold, dead hand. Jeff chuckled at Mickey's indrawn breath. Sorry, Mickey, Jason said. I couldn't resist. He's used that line so many times. He held the gun out to Jeff. Put this away so no one freaks out before you get out of here. Got it, Jeff said, reaching out for the weapon. He quickly checked it, locked it, placed it in the metal bedside drawer. Jason leaned forward and took Jeff's hand and started to speak, then stopped as his emotions got the better of him. Jeff nodded at him. Jason nodded back, then moved quickly toward the door. Mickey watched him go until Jeff jerked her hand and pulled her down to him. You okay, baby? She nodded. You're alive. I'm more than okay. Well, you know, if you hadn't disobeyed me, you'd probably be dead. She grinned. You should never have brought that up. Well, you're probably right about that, he sighed. You'll never listen to me again. So tell me, what made you come downstairs? She thought a minute. I heard the shots, and then everything got so quiet, and all I could think was you'd been shot and were lying there dying while I was hiding like a coward in the bathroom, and I had to find you. You are such a warrior. She shrugged. I just love you. You love me, huh? She smiled. I do. Well, all I can say is I'm very glad you came looking for me. He tugged at the IV, and now all I want to do is get out of here. Well, we'll get out soon enough. Besides, Nate will be here soon. At least we should wait for him. Okay, and then we'll go. I want to go back to the house and look things over. There's not much left to look at. He rubbed his hand up and down her arm. I'm sorry, Mick. It's not your fault. Insurance will pay, and I'll rebuild, and then I'll probably sell. Bad vibes, you know. He nodded. I understand. They both looked up as Nate walked through the door and loaded down with bags. Hey, bud, Nate said, grinning. He tossed everything on the nearest chair and came to take Jeff's hand. I'm glad you're still with us. Thanks, man. Glad to be here. But not glad to be here, Nate said with a laugh. Don't worry, you're leaving soon. I brought you a shirt, some shoes and socks, and money. Did my truck make it through? Yeah, everything out front was okay, so your truck, Mickey's car, and Marissa's room made it through. He turned to Mickey. Your room, though, looks to be a total loss, as does most of the downstairs living area. She sighed. I didn't think much survived. When the room phone rang, Jeff picked it up, and he raised his eyebrows in a gesture of surprise. And then with his hand over the mouthpiece, he handed the phone to Mickey. It's for you. It's your mom. You're kidding, Mickey said. She shook her head. I don't want to talk to her. Come on, Mick, be brave. She said she saw the news and couldn't believe what happened, and she needed to hear your voice for herself. Mickey blew out a breath and took the phone, but turned her back so she could have a little privacy. So, Nate said, tell me what the hell happened. You haven't heard? Well, sure I have, but I want the dirt from you. While Nate and Jeff talked, Mickey spoke softly into the phone. You tell your husband not to hurt her. Tell him I'll be there. I just have to figure out a way to get there, but tell him I'm coming, and you'd better believe it won't be pleasant. She hung up the phone and put it back on the bedside table, smiling and easing into the conversation. A few minutes later, Jack walked through the door, and the conversation started all over again. And 30 minutes later, the door opened again, and a nurse took Jeff's vitals and left. And 15 minutes after that, Jeff's parents walked in the door. Mom, Dad, Jeff said, I didn't think you'd be here so soon. We got lucky and managed to grab an earlier flight, Mr. Davis said as Jeff's mom leaned over the bed and threw her arms around him. Mickey backed away to give them room, but she didn't get very far before Jeff's mom approached her. You're Mackenzie, aren't you? Jeff's right. You're even prettier in person. It's so nice to meet you. Mickey brushed at the soot and streaks of dirt and blood on her clothing, the mismatched clothing she'd pulled on quickly when she went in search of Jeff. Thank you. I'm afraid I'm a mess right now. Mom, Dad, Jeff said. Obviously, this is Mackenzie Daly. We call her Mickey. Mr. Davis extended his hand and smiled warmly. Nice to meet you, Mickey. Mickey nodded. I'm sorry you have to come see your son in the hospital all because of me. Don't be ridiculous, Jeff said. It's my fault. You've been through so much just trying to protect me. Well, if not you, then someone else, Mr. Davis stated matter-of-factly. I'm sure he's glad it was you. Mrs. Davis smiled. We've almost gotten used to Jeff's career choice. She turned and placed her hand on Jeff's shoulder. Almost. If we had anyone to blame for him being injured, it would have to be his grandpa Jared, who bought him his first video game. From that moment on, it's been guns and rifles and cops and robbers. Jeff jumped in then, defending his grandfather. Mickey tried to pay attention, but her mind was circling so fast, it seemed the conversation was merely background noise. There was laughter and jokes, and then the story of what happened last night, along with the nurse coming in to remove Jeff's IV with the good news that they were preparing his release paperwork, and Mickey knew she had to make her move. She made her way around the room, covertly collecting what she needed, then uttered some inane excuse about finding a more private restroom in which to freshen up. A few minutes later, she was climbing into a cab headed for the Daly mansion. She sat nervously, trying to make her mind think about the actions she was about to take. When Mickey had been a child, no one had ever defended her. Today, she would defend her sister. She patted the gun in her purse, hoping her mother wouldn't try to intervene. The cab pulled up in front of the house, and Mickey shoved the $2.20 she'd stolen from Jeff into his hand and got out, looking up at the house she'd grown up in, suffered in, the house she hated. She drew a calming breath and walked up the wide circular steps. When she tried the door, it opened, and she slipped inside. Marion came hurrying to meet her. "Mickey, oh, Mick, I'm so glad you're okay." "Where's Marissa?" Mickey asked, ignoring her mother's ridiculous statements. Mickey never understood how her mother could say things that sounded like she actually cared, yet ignored her husband's actions. She figured it was an act, a role, one her mother had been playing since she married Talman Daly. "Marissa's, your father told me to tell you to go to his study." Mickey turned on her. "Let me tell you this one more time, Mother. He's not my father. Stop calling him that." She looked toward the study. "Leave this to me. You go see to Marissa." Marion only wrung her hands and nodded, knowing full well Marissa was nowhere around. Mickey went to the study and slipped inside. Talman sat at his desk, calmly waiting for her. "I see you cared enough about your sister to come," he said quietly. "Come in. Have a seat." She stepped closer to the desk. "I won't be sitting down. Where's Marissa?" Talman laughed, rose, and circled around behind Mickey. "Marissa's not here, Mackenzie. You don't really think I would hurt her, do you? After all, she is my flesh and blood." "Then why?" He shook his head. "You always were so rash, rushing off, doing things before you thought them through. I knew you would come running over here. And why did I want you here? Is that what you were about to ask? Well, of course, to finish what 3 freaking professionals couldn't do last night." This time Mickey laughed. "I don't think it's going to turn out the way you think, Talman." "I suppose we're about to find that out." He pulled a small handgun from his suit pocket and pointed it at her. Mickey took a few seconds to let her heart settle. He may have pulled his weapon first, but she had a big surprise for him. He'd never think that she'd actually come armed and ready to fight back. Him holding a gun on her is actually a good thing, she reasoned. It will give her a defense when they put her on trial for murder, because she did intend to kill him today. No matter what, he was going down. Last night, he'd almost killed the man she loved. He'll never hurt anyone again. She'd been more than willing to accept that she'd had an abusive childhood and to move past it. She'd done just that, hadn't she? She hadn't been sitting around feeling sorry for herself. She'd put it all behind her, moved on, pushed the ugly scenes from her heart and mind. It was his paranoia that led him to come after her again. Well, she's not a weak, frightened little girl anymore. His soft laughter brought her thoughts to an end. "What's the matter, Mackenzie? I've never seen you at a loss for words. Usually you can't hold that smart tongue of yours. You've always been so completely defiant." She ignored his barbs. She wanted to know his plan so she could figure out the best time to pull Jeff's gun from her purse and blow him the freak away. "So, what now? You're just going to shoot me right here? I can't imagine you taking the chance of getting blood on any of your precious things." His eyes traveled over her, lingering. "Oh, no. I'm going to have some fun first." "Fun?" He licked his lips. "You and I, Mackenzie, we're going up to your room just like the good old days, only this time I'm going to do exactly what I want to do. No holding back." Mickey's stomach took a dive at the thought of what he wanted to do. He'd never get the chance. Still, he was admitting what he always wanted to do. Her mind raced to figure out how she could handle it. Maybe she should pretend to submit. She'd done that briefly with Richard while she worked to get her weapon in position. It had relaxed him enough to give her the chance to put that piece of glass against his neck. Bile rose in her throat at the thought of what she'd done, and realizing the trauma of that event may affect her today, she wondered if, when the time comes, will she be able to point her gun at Talman and pull the trigger. Talman swirled his gun in a circular motion. Turn around. When she did as instructed, he moved close and pushed the gun against her back. His free hand moved around her waist and pulled her in tight against his body. He leaned close and put his lips against her ear. You and me, Mackenzie. I'm guessing you've thought about it before. Have you ever wondered what it would be like? Mickey closed her eyes as the fury built. Nope. She was not going to have any problem at all blowing him away. He let go and took a step back. We're going to walk slowly. Go up the front stairs to your room. Got it? She nodded, holding her purse close against her abdomen as she worked her hand inside, because no way was she going to let him take her up to that room again. No way. They walked down the front hall toward the front door. It was as they turned at the bottom of the stairs to head up that she made her move. Jumping up onto the first step, she spun as she let the purse fall to the floor, leaving only the gun in her hand. The look of surprise on her stepfather's face was so worth the wait. She reveled in the feeling of triumph for several moments, and then his look of surprise changed quickly to rage. Drop the gun, Daddy dearest, Mickey said. He grinned and shook his head. You drop yours. There is no way that's going to happen. Now drop the gun, she yelled. He just stood there, that snide, ugly smile on his face. No, you drop yours. Drop the freaking gun, she screamed. I will shoot you, I swear it. What's going on? What's happening? Marion cried as she came running from the kitchen. In a flash, Talman grabbed his wife in a headlock and planted his gun against her temple. The house was quiet except for the women's heavy breathing. What are you going to do now, little girl? Put the gun down or I blow your mother's brains out. Mickey's hand trembled. She's your wife. She's never done anything to you, but she's done everything for you. She stood behind you all these years, and you're gonna just kill her? He shrugged. I'll do what I have to do. I don't think you will, she said. He chuckled. There's so much you don't know about me, Mackenzie. You'll never get away with it. He shook his head. Stupid girl. I'm not trying to get away with anything. I don't care anymore, Mackenzie. I've lost everything, and it's all your fault, and now you're gonna pay. I received a call a little while ago from my attorney. He's going to pick me up in a few hours, and I'm supposed to go with him to turn myself over to authorities. Marion gasped and tried to pull away, but he kept the gun firmly against her head. It's over for me, Mackenzie. Your mother and I, we were going to take a vacation and go away, but you messed that up for me, you and Dora. My attorney tells me Dora has come forward and told all about our little relationship. Mickey swallowed hard as she looked into her mother's bewildered eyes. He had nothing to lose. He'd kill her mother, and yet she knew if she put the gun down, there was no doubt he'd take her upstairs and rape her just like he said he would. What if she could stall? Certainly, Jeff has realized that she's gone by now. He won't sit around waiting to see if she'll come back. He'll know where she is. He'll come looking for her. Her mind shifted to Jeff realizing what she'd done. He'll be furious, though she couldn't blame him. You can save your mother's life, Mackenzie. All you have to do is put the gun down, and I'll let her go. Mickey gazed at the pitiful woman. Did you know about Dora, Mom? The confused look on her mother's face told her what she wanted to know. He raped her, and not just once, so many times, Mom, for years. Marion began to cry. You think you know it all, little girl? You don't know half. He jerked Marion, tightening his hold on her throat. Shut up, he yelled at his wife. Stop your incessant crying. His finger flinched on the trigger. Why don't you tell her, Talman? Tell her all the things you've done. What do you want me to tell her, Mackenzie? That I raped Dora, or that I killed off Dora's husband all those years ago? You're a monster, Mickey whispered. I'm powerful, Mackenzie. Your mother knows I'm powerful. Tell her the rest then, Mickey demanded, hoping to waste more time and gain more evidence against him for her imagined trial. What? That I arranged to have you kidnapped and murdered? Or that I hired men to end your life last night? Or that I told Kurt to off that Keno kid, or that I'm about to make $80 million on an arms deal that's been ongoing for years? Or is it something more personal you're after, like how much I enjoyed beating your young, soft body and bringing you pain, or how I looked forward to getting my hands on you? Mickey's eyes met her mother's. There was terror there, and regret, and sorrow, and Mickey suddenly realized the woman had been no match for the powerful, manipulative man, and that Dora knew that, and that was why she hovered over her mom like a mother hen. Dora had done all she could to protect her. Put your gun on the floor and slide it toward me, Talman said. This is the last time I'm going to ask you. I count to 5, your mother dies. 1. Mickey's hand trembled. She had no choice. 2. I hate you with every fiber of my being. 3. Okay. Stepping down from the steps, she carefully placed the gun on the floor and pushed it toward him. He stopped it with his foot, then kicked it, and the gun slid to the far side of the formal living room. Talman lowered the gun from Marion's head, jerked his arm, and threw her away from him. She sprawled onto the hardwood floor, then, still crying, rose to her knees and crawled away like a wounded animal. She'll go curl up in a corner and cry herself to sleep like the pathetic, weak dog she is. Talman nodded toward the steps. Let's go. New scene. Nate came back into the room after Jeff sent him to find out what was taking Mickey so long. She'd said she wanted some privacy and would find a restroom near the waiting area. With his parents there, he understood that she would want to clean up the best she could. After all, she was a mess. Her clothes had been covered in soot and dirt and blood. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her face was dirty and tear-streaked. He couldn't blame her. After a lengthy conversation with his parents, Jeff realized that she'd been gone quite a while, and he'd sent Nate to find her. Well, Jeff asked. Nate shook his head. I can't find her. I checked every restroom I could find, spoke to the nurses. One remembers her heading out, said she got on the elevator, so I went down to the cafeteria, but she wasn't there either. I thought maybe she went to buy some clean clothes, so I went to the gift shops. She's not here, Jeff. Controlling the mindless terror that wanted to take him over, he moved quickly and nodded at the stuff Nate had arrived with. Toss me my clothes. What's going on? His mom asked. Do you think something's happened to Mackenzie? I shouldn't have let her out of my sight. Daly is still out there. He could have sent someone to take her. Sitting down, he pulled on his shoes and socks. I gotta go find her. Nate, call Jason for me. He finished dressing, opened the drawer of the bedside table. Oh, no. Wait, Nate. Hold on, Nate said into the phone. What is it? My gun is gone. She must have taken it. That means she left here on her own. And if she took my freaking gun, she went hunting for the senator, Nate said as he filled Jason in. Jeff, can we do anything to help? His father asked. He shook his head. No, I know where she is. Nate and I were headed to Daly's. You guys go check into a hotel and I'll be in touch. Be careful, Jeff, his father admonished. New scene. Mickey shook her head. There's no way I'm going to go up there with you and let you touch me. You're a sick, pathetic pervert. It makes me wonder what happened to you that made you so depraved. What was it, huh? Did your mommy refuse to breastfeed you? Did your daddy like little boys? Why are you such a sicko? Are you sure you're going to be able to do it once you get me upstairs? His free hand struck out, and Mickey's head turned violently with the blow, and she stumbled back against the railing. He leveled the gun at her. I guess you're about to find out. You were always so stubborn. You always made me have to prove that I could do exactly what I said I would do. Now move up the steps. You don't really have a choice in the matter. You'll do as I say, or you'll die. She shrugged. Me anyway, I won't submit to you. Ever. Talman stood there calmly. You think you're smart? You've been a pain from the moment I met you. Do you remember, Mackenzie? Oh, I remember it clearly. I knew from the very first day when you came to take my mother out to dinner that you were a jerk, and nothing's changed. His eyes flared before he got control. You don't know the half of it. If not for you, it would have been so easy. Yeah, well, life sucks. I had it planned out so well. Everything I needed to make it. I could have been president. Mickey gave a short burst of laughter. Ha! In your dreams. He moved forward and swung again, catching her in the mouth and knocking her to the floor. Moaning, Mickey rose to her knees and wiped the blood from her lip. You feel better? She asked. He placed the gun against her forehead. Take your shirt off. What happened to going upstairs? We can finish our business right here. Still pressing the gun against her head, he grabbed the edge of her shirt and jerked, and the material ripped. Mickey found herself wincing as she imagined the gun accidentally going off as he tried to tear her clothing away. But she needed to stay alive and keep him talking. Okay, hold on, she said, I'll do it. He stopped and stepped back and watched in fascination as she pulled the torn material away from her body. He felt the familiar pull of lust, the one he'd felt whenever he looked at her, especially when she was in a state of submissiveness as she was now, on her knees, hurt and bleeding. She'd tortured him since she'd been a little 7-year-old brat, her tiny body trembling whenever he came near. Back then, he'd lived in almost a constant state of arousal, so he'd used Dora and others to appease him. Why he'd never just gone ahead and forced her, he didn't know. Maybe he liked the state of need he was always in around her. Maybe he'd been afraid if he gave in and had her, she would lose her appeal. She was trembling now like she used to, her eyes filled with tears that she would try to hold back no matter what. It pleased him so much. He motioned at her with the gun. The rest, now. He smiled when he saw her hands tremble as she moved to obey him. She was moving in slow motion, trying to stall as long as possible. Her eyes met his. You're such a degenerate. You can blame me all you want, but really, Mackenzie, it's all your fault. You've done this to me. All I ever wanted was to take the money your stupid father flaunted in my face, take his family, and build my career, and it... She paused her task. What are you talking about? You knew my father? He laughed. Oh, yes, Mackenzie. Your father and I were partners, only his aspirations were much lower than mine. Circling behind her, he knelt down over her and pressed the gun to her throat. He wanted her to suffer. He wanted her to cry and whimper like she used to. He placed his hand on her back. That's right, little girl. Your father had no gumption. Mickey winced, not because he hurt her, but because she lost control, and a tear made its way down her cheek, and she knew it would please him. She sniffed. My father would never have been your partner. He would have hated you. Oh, he did hate me, at the end. He moved the gun up to her head and placed his lips on her cheek. He hated me when I told him I would relieve him of the $40,000 he won on the horses, and when I told him I would use the money to further my political aspirations. His hand gripped her arm. When I told him that after I killed him, I would take his family and use them to gain respectability. She stiffened, more from what he said than from his hand squeezing her arm in an iron grip. You killed my father? She sobbed. Oh, come on now, that was a long time ago. She reached down and grabbed his hand and tried to pull it away from her. He pressed the gun harder against her head. Calm down, Mackenzie. It will all be over soon. Now do as I say and take your clothes off. The tears welled over. You killed my father. Water under the bridge. Don't make me mad. Take off your clothes, Mackenzie. Now. I'm going to finish this. He moved his hand up to grab her cheeks. But you know what? I've just decided that first I want you to use this smart mouth of yours for something other than back talk. She turned her head and tried to bite his hand. He pressed the gun harder against her. Did you forget who has the gun? Shoot me. I don't care anymore, but I know you won't. You won't because you don't want a corpse. You want me alive and kicking and fighting you. He chuckled. I guess you do know me, so I guess I'll just have to make you a little more cooperative. His fist tangled in her hair as he stood, dragging her to her feet. He placed the gun down on the hall table, pulled back his fist, and punched her. Mickey punched back. She kicked, scratched, fought with every ounce of strength, and though he had the definite advantage, she had the satisfaction of hearing him grunt a few times when she connected. His fist drove into her face, her chest, her stomach, into her kidney when she tried to turn away, into her ear when she tried to block him from her face, and in the end he straddled her barely conscious figure, breathing hard, exhausted from the fight. Stroking her cheek, he leaned down. You messed up everything in my life, Mackenzie, he whispered softly. A little girl, a stubborn, spoiled little girl. Well, little girl, you're going to pay now, just like your old man. That's what happens when someone crosses me. Dora knew that. So did Kurt and Butch and all the others. Let's do this, he said as he tugged on her jeans. The blast from the gun shocked them both. Even though dazed from the beating she'd just taken, Mickey realized she'd been given a reprieve. Talman grabbed at his shoulder as he was knocked back. He rolled over and came up, and Mickey moved her head slightly to see her mother standing just behind her, holding Jeff's gun in her outstretched hands. "You're going to pay for that with your life," Talman said as he advanced. "No," Mickey moaned, trying to grab at him, but her body wouldn't obey. As it turned out, it was unnecessary for her to move at all. The next shot hit her stepfather square in the chest. New scene. Nate and Jeff pulled into the gate and up the circular drive to the front of the Daly mansion. They sprang from the car. The feds were right behind them. When he heard the gunshot, a myriad of pictures ran through Jeff's mind. It felt as if he were moving through quicksand as he headed for the front door. Nate circled around the side entrance. Jeff held Nate's spare gun in one hand and twisted the doorknob. As the second shot was fired, he barged in. Of all the things he'd pictured, this scene never crossed his mind. Daly lay on his back, a hole in his chest, blood pooling around him. Mickey, dressed only in jeans, lay opposite him, battered and semi-conscious, her feet almost touching Daly's. Marion Daly stood as still as a statue, the gun she held firmly in her hands pointed straight at Jeff. "Mrs. Daly," Jeff said calmly as he tucked his gun away, "it's okay. I'm here to help you and Mickey." Her eyes shifted down to the prone man and back to Jeff. He smiled kindly at her as he edged his way forward. "Give me the gun now. He can't hurt you any more." Jeff kept his eyes on hers as Nate came up behind her and gently removed the gun from her hand. The woman collapsed in Nate's arms. Only a moment later, the feds came through the door. Jeff knelt down next to Mickey's prone body, bruised and bloody and covered in perspiration. She looked much like the first time he saw her, only this time she appeared to be unconscious. He put fingers to her throat, searching for and gratefully finding a pulse. Gently, he lifted her onto his lap. His heart leapt when Mickey moved her battered face up and burrowed in against his neck and breathed deeply. Agent Dodge removed his suit jacket and placed it around Mickey's shoulders. "Thanks," Jeff said. "Ambulance is on the way," the agent answered, squeezing Jeff's shoulder. "Miss Daly, can you speak?" She kept her eyes closed. "Yes." "Is there anything you want to tell us before the EMTs get here?" "He killed my father," Mickey mumbled. "He told me he killed my father back when I was a kid. He did it to take some money my father wanted and to take my mother for his wife." Sighing, Agent Dodge shook his head in disgust. Talman Daly, a United States Senator, was one of the worst criminals he'd ever encountered throughout his long career as a federal agent. Mickey looked up. "He was gonna rape me and then shoot me, but my mother, she had no choice." "She won't be charged," he assured her. And that is the end of chapter 14. Now let me see if I can figure out how to turn this off. Let's see. What does that do? No. Stop streaming.